Good morning, everybody. Good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. My name is Noha Alkalsi, and I'm the Programs Director at Team MCN. Very excited to welcome you all to our global webinar this morning here in where I am in the Eastern Time Zone in the US. And I'm so excited today to welcome Mr. Rakesh Rajani, who will be our speaker for the webinar. Queen is going to be hopefully joining us at a later time. I know she's facing some internet difficulties, but until then, we'd love to go ahead and get the webinar started and get the conversation started with Mr. Rakesh Rajani. So before we start, if you can all, and I'm seeing introductions in the chat box, I'd love for you all to introduce yourself if you haven't already. If you can share your name, university, where you're currently based, and where you're currently from, that would be fantastic. So we'll go ahead and get started with our call and webinar. I'm already seeing intros, so thank you for sharing. People from Ghana, Nigeria, India, US, thank you all for being here today, and Australia, which I know it's very late there, so thank you for joining. So we'll go ahead and get started for our webinar. The agenda would be, I'll have a conversation with Mr. Rajani for the first 30 minutes of our call with a moderated conversation. And then for the next 30 minutes, or for the remaining last 30 minutes of the call, we'll go ahead and have an open Q&A. So if you do have any questions during our conversation today, please type it in the chat box, and we'll go ahead and call your name to ask your question. So with that, I am really excited to bring Mr. Rajani. If you can hear me, I'll go ahead and make you a co-host so you're able to mute and unmute yourself. How are you doing today?
I'm very well, and I'm super excited to be doing this with all of you. This is so much fun.
Thank you so much for hopping on. So just a brief intro, and I would love to have you then tell us a little bit more about yourself. But Mr. Rakesh Rajani is a Tanzanian civil society leader, and he currently serves as the Vice President of Co-Impact, which is a global philanthropic collaborative focused on system change in education, health, and economic opportunity. Previously, I know you co-founded Twawiza and Hi Kilimo, if I pronounced it correctly, which promotes, for Twawiza, promotes evidence-based informed reforms in education and governance in East Africa. He also previously served as the director of the Democratic Governance and Participation at the Ford Foundation. He sits on the boards of the Hewlett Foundation, Innovation for Poverty Action, and International Budget. We're so honored to have you on. Thank you so much for giving us some of your time today to share all of the learnings and experiences that you have with Millennium Fellows.
Great, thank you, Noah, and hello again, everybody from all over. I'm especially grateful for those of you who've joined at kind of crazy hours where you are, and I'm, since I'm from East Africa, I'm particularly happy to see so many people from different parts of Africa. So great. I thank you for that introduction, Noah. Those are the kinds of roles I have. Basically, one way of putting it is I've worked in civil society for about 25 years, and now I work in philanthropy, which is a fancy way of saying giving rich people's money to do good work in the world for the last five and a half years. I'm currently based in New York, but I'm a Tanzanian and hope to go back home soon, one of these days. This is I think a really important conversation we're having, because I think learning is the most crucial ingredient to success in global development in ways that are often overlooked. So if should I just jump in, Noha, to share some thoughts and then we open it up?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay. So look, I think as I think you will have seen, and I'm kind of going to somewhat oversimplify the point just to make it, I know it's a little more nuanced, is that a lot of what global development is about, whether it is done by governments or NGOs or big project managers, is you typically start off and you make a plan. So you will have seen like a proposal or a project plan. It typically is a very impressive, thick document. It kind of explains what the problem is and what they're going to do. And then there will be something called the theory of change. And then there will be like often a matrix, a big table that says, here are all the activities we're going to do, and doing all those activities will then lead to this change in the world. So, and a huge amount of time goes into making that plan and making that plan look impressive. You often pay a lot of money to experts sometimes to go make that plan for you, so you can raise the money and you then try to implement the plan. And then the idea is that the best success comes from people who implement the plan well. I find there are three big problems with that model. The first is when you make a plan, the kinds of things you talk about in that plan are important, but often not the most important. The stuff that is crucial to success is often hard to write about in a plan, right? So for example, if you want an education system to be able to really help children learn, to help children learn skills, to become super confident, for girls in particular to be super confident so they can stand up to their boys and men and believe in themselves and pursue their dreams, what is going to be crucial to that happening is often not what will be written in the plan. Or the things that will be written in the plan will not address what are the core issues, such as, for example, if an entire schooling system or a ministry has deep gender discrimination baked in, if the head teacher or the principal of the school conducts himself in a way that always gives the message that men should be in charge and women are just to be told what to do, it doesn't matter if the curriculum says we are all equal. If his own behavior sends a signal that the real way things should happen is like this, and that goes unchallenged, everybody will understand that's how reality works. And these sorts of things like motivations, incentives, and so forth are not addressed in the plan. So the first problem about a plan is how you write it often doesn't help you address the most important issues. The second problem with like the idea of development as following a plan is that in reality, life changes. Life is unpredictable. So when you make a plan to do something over, say, 5 years, you make a number of assumptions. Even if you don't call them assumptions, you assume that certain things will remain in place. The person who is the minister will be the minister. The country that is stable will continue to be stable. You don't predict things like COVID is going to happen. You don't predict things like the rains will be so bad that there'll be flooding that disrupts life, or the rains will not come and people will be so hungry that they can't focus on anything else because they are focusing on how to get food. And so you can make a plan, but the plan may become irrelevant in relation to the context at that moment. The third and final thing I want to emphasize here is that your ideas of what will lead to change may in fact be wrong or incomplete, right? So for instance, in work that I was doing in East Africa, in Tanzania, Kenya, and Uganda, one of the things we focused on is giving people information that they can then use to make better decisions. So we spent a lot of time, a lot of energy, and a lot of money to give people information around schools and, for example, whether their children are learning. And we thought that if a parent knows, oh, I'm sending my child to school, but my child is actually not able to read and to do math, then they will get worried and concerned and try to do different actions. They will follow up with the school and say, why is my child not learning? And they will start changing some of the activities they do in order to make sure their children learn. So if we give them this information, then it will lead to different action. And we did a superb job in giving people this information. And guess what? The behavior didn't change. Nothing changed.
What?
Life went on as normal. And we said, why? Is it because parents don't care? Obviously not. Parents care deeply about their children learning. So why was something not happening? And when we dug in, we realized that what it was even information was helpful, but it wasn't enough. It was necessary, but not sufficient. That in fact, many parents felt unable to go to the school. They felt that because they themselves were not educated, they would not be respected. They didn't know who to speak to when they go to the school. They felt school belongs to the teachers and we parents have nothing, we have no standing, we have no mandate to be able to go and talk to the teachers. So even though they were worried, it did not lead to any action. Now, if we had just continued following our plan, we would have just kept on giving more and more information to more and more people, and nothing would have changed. So we had to change our plan and our efforts to focus much more on what would give parents agency, and also begin to realize actually it's not fair to put it on parents. The action was needed somewhere else. So I have given you 3 examples or 3 instances why making a plan and following a plan is the wrong way to do development. So if then making a plan and following a plan is not what will help you, what do you do instead? What will help you instead? And this is where I want to come to learning. So if you ask me the question, what is the most necessary quality to success in development? I would say the most important quality is curiosity. It's the ability to ask questions rather than to offer solutions. One of my favorite global development thinkers, and if you haven't come across him, I would encourage you to look him up. His name is Lant Pritchett. Wrote a paper once called Solutions When Solutions Are the Problem. A lot of the time what goes wrong is we think we know the answers and we go gung-ho in implementing the solution, when in effect, the problem is not the solution, or the solution is the problem, because the fact that we think we know the answers is the problem. What we should come in is with better questions and curiosity. So when I do recruitment, for example, I've hired thousands of people in my life. What I look for is, does she ask questions, right? Is she curious? Is she more interested in knowing what will work and won't work? Or is she more interested in just knowing all in giving the solution? And I am much more interested in seekers and in skeptics and in people who are like, I'm not so sure. Or how will I know that doing X will lead to Y? I'm much more interested in people who bring those attributes than people who say, I've done my research, this is what we should do. In this quality, at the individual level, the skeptic, the person who says, I believe this thing deeply, but I wonder if it will work. The person who says, I am so passionate about this issue, but I am not so sure whether doing this will lead to the result, and therefore I'm not going to be paralyzed, but in the way I go about doing this, I'm actually going to test whether my idea will work in practice. Those are the people that we really need doing global development. Those are the people you want on your team. Let me make 1 or 2 more points, and then I'd love to hear your reactions and your questions, and I'll turn it back to you, Noha. Another simple way of doing this is to say, when leaders doing global development, do they spend more time talking, or do they spend more time listening? Does a leader, when a leader opens up a meeting, or the leader, say, chairs a meeting, does the leader spend more time kind of issuing declarations and instructions, or does the leader spend more time asking questions and then truly listening to the answer? Does a leader come across as, I'm really keen to understand what you think about this thing? Or does the leader come across and say, I want you to follow, I want you to do what I tell you to do? I think we want the leaders who are really curious, who are really interested in knowing what other people think. And when we say what other people think, the most important curiosity is the one that goes outside our frame. If I ask people who are like myself, people who think like me, who went to the same schools that I went to, who had the same grown-up experience, lived experiences as I do, then essentially I am looking for validation of my own thoughts. I'm looking for confirmation about my own biases. So what you want is to be surprised. You want to surround yourselves with people who share your values, but who think differently, right? Who think differently than you do, who will question your assumptions, who will bring perspectives that are different. That is even more important than the people who validate your own thinking, who will make you think differently. That doesn't mean you don't hold strong convictions. It's important to have convictions, but your convictions, especially your strongest or most passionate convictions, should be open to be questioned and to be changed continually, right? And the final point I want to make is I'm a big believer in transparency and in openness. I think, for example, when organizations have a plan, have a strategy, they should make them open. They should put them on their website. I think when you have an evaluation, you should make it open and put it on your website. As you go about doing things, you will obviously make mistakes. And if you can be open about those mistakes and share them publicly and discuss them, that is what creates the environment in your organization, outside your organization, in society, that invites critique and debate, that invites not being afraid of talking about mistakes and learning from those mistakes, that creates a culture and a value that says, wow, the most interesting thing worth doing is to bring this skeptical perspective. And the best people are not only the people who say, yes, boss, but the best people are the ones who say, yes, boss, this is so important and exciting, but I wonder, what about this? Or we thought doing X was great, but now as we listen to community, as we look at the data that's coming back, we are finding perhaps that we were wrong, or perhaps some of our assumptions were not right, like in the example I gave of the project I did on information. Creating that culture inside organizations, inside teams, inside societies is absolutely crucial to success. So I'm sure you know these things, and let me stop here, and let me turn back to you, Noah, in terms of how we make this a discussion going forward.
Great, thank you so much. This is really valuable information, and I really love the emphasis on, as I'm also reading the comments, creating seekers and skeptics, encouraging curiosity, which I think is often an overlooked quality that employees and leaders tend to seek, and asking questions and the right questions as well. So thank you for sharing all of these points. I know we've been really grateful at MCN to take a lot of your learning and use that as we think about evaluation and how to build an organization. And a lot of the fellows on the call today are working on their own projects, and they're finding ways to try and engage in creating change and advancing at least one of the sustainable development goals through either projects that they're part of or that they're co-founding. And so maybe along the lines of what you shared, well, what advice do you have for them in terms of how to create a learning organization? How do they sustain, growing and learning from the feedback that they get? So once they ask questions and actively listen, how do they continue and create this environment where they're encouraging not just themselves, but also their team members in building an organization that is built on learning from its own mistakes, from its own success, and from the questions that they get?
Great question. So, I'm going to say is a bunch of things that I'm sure are obvious to many of you, but it's sometimes easier to say than to practice. I know I struggle with it, so I'll say them. The first thing I want to say is just read. Read a lot, and read things that you are familiar to you, and then read things that are unfamiliar. And I'm using the word read specifically to start off with. I'm not saying watch. I'm not saying YouTube. I'm not saying because I think there is something about the nature of written words that comes with a certain discipline when it's well written that's helpful. It's helpful because it brings in it a way, an analytical frame where you don't just say things, but you are able to follow the logic of what is being said. If you learn to read critically, that I'm sure many of you do, it allows you to actually interrogate when somebody says A, therefore B, right? So I think it's helpful to just read, and if you, it's really one of the most important skills is to recognize who are the good writers around the world, who can write well and write clearly. And by the way, the more good reading you read, the better writer you become yourself, the better, at making the case. In short, what I'm trying to say is good reading leads to better thinking. And so just read a lot, and if you are not reading, and sometimes people say, I'm so busy, I have so much to do, I don't have to read. Oh, I don't have time to read. Well, that's almost like saying, I have so much to do, I don't have time to bring in oxygen for my brain. Your brain will start dying. You might get a lot done, but yeah. So make time. Like in my organization, we have so much to do as well, but we make sure, for example, we have these certain moments, regardless of anything else going on, we will stop to read and discuss something, even though lots of things may be crazy. So number one, read. Number two, modeling is really important. By modeling, I mean, live what you are talking about. So when you show up, whether you are a staff member or a leader yourself, however you engage, show this posture of loving the question more than loving the answer. Show excitement about how you are learning new things. Especially show excitement about how either you are changing your mind about something. One of the most powerful things to do is to say, I used to believe this, but now, having read this or listened to that person or seen this, I'm wondering, I'm changing my mind, right? That is profound when you can do that. And especially when people look up to you, when you are a leader, that is even more profound. When a leader is willing to admit that I was wrong about something, or I've changed my mind on something. So to bring that curiosity, and as part of that, what is really important to model is being more interested in listening to the views of other people and other thinkers than in talking about your own ideas. Now, this is hard because some of you may, and I think this is particularly difficult for I would imagine young women, because the experience of young women is often that you know it better than I. You get pushed out. Men like me take up all the space. So you want to be absolutely assertive, but you can be assertive in a macho way, or you can be assertive in a way that creates space for others and creates space for other ideas. And both, I think, being feminist men and women is about engaging and listening and loving the question in ways that make space for ideas to come from different people, and to have the engagement of ideas and the openness of those ideas get us excited.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And I do want to take a minute to just ask all fellows and everybody joining the call, if you have a favorite book or something that you've read recently that you think other fellows would appreciate. Let's leverage the time that we have together here. So type it in the chat box and have other people learn and get maybe that practice of reading and getting a new books to learn about. Thank you so much, Rakesh, for sharing that. that. So I do want to shift our conversation a little bit to, well, still also thinking about projects. So I know that, the grants that Co-Impact supports today seem to be relatively large and include levels from, 10 to 25 million. What does it take to create an initiative that is so impactful to be considered for support at this scale? What do you typically look for?
So what we care a lot about evidence before we get to this large scale, right? So if you think in anything, when you want to do something big, it's important that you first start small with the idea. You be big in your ambition, but start small in terms of how you do it, right? And once and a lot of the time, like I said, the first, second, third, fourth time you'll be wrong, right? There's lots of stories in business, and then, for example, from Silicon Valley, before Gmail happened, there are 1,000 versions of Gmail that failed. And had Google rolled out Gmail for everybody, their first or second version, Google would be out of business. So it's important for us to start small. And for many of you, it may be that in your career, you are not one at this stage where you want to be able to go for the $25 million to raise today. You should think $25 million, or you should think $1 billion. But how do you start with specific steps and then build up the evidence? So what we do is, when something is proven to work at scale, we then put wind behind the sails to make it go bigger. The other thing that is really important, and this may be a bit controversial, some of you may disagree with this, is I am very skeptical of what I call projects. Projects can do good things, but projects often happen on the side of society. If you look through history, the way societies have organized themselves is through government, right? Governments is government is our expression of how we collectively organize ourselves. So what we really need to focus a lot on is not giving up on government. I know governments are very problematic. They are authoritarian, they can often be corrupt, they can be not innovative. But if we give up on governments and start doing our things outside of government, and yes, some things we do need to do like that. But if most of our energy goes into that, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. What ends up happening is our governments will be terrible, and we will do these slight, tiny projects on the outside, but the vast majority of the population will not benefit. So as young people, as young scholars and leaders and activists, I want you to think about, how do you reclaim government for the people? How do you go make governments work better? And the projects or the initiatives we support are ones that all bring in the best ideas and thinking and engage with government to change how government is already doing something to make it work better at scale. So that's what I would encourage you to do. Whether you become a government civil servant or a politician, or whether you work as a civil society independent person, I want you to engage with government, because we need to make governments work for people. We say in Swahili, serikali ni sisi. In English, that is, government is us. Government is not somebody else. Government is us. So we need to make sure that works. And that's the work that Co-Impact is supporting.
Great, thank you so much. And I think that, that is really important. I do want to give the rest of the time to our Q&A. So I want to shift out. I already see a lot of great questions in the chat box. And so I'd love to open it up to all of the fellows who have questions. So if you do have any questions, feel free to add it in the chat box, and we'll go ahead and get started. So I see one question by Tosin Yusufu. When I unmute you, if you can please introduce your name, university, and where you're currently at, and ask your questions. So we'll start with Tosin. If you wanna, if you can unmute yourself now and say hello. Can you hear us?
Hello everyone. I'm Tosin Yusufu from University of Ilorin, Nigeria. So a question is on the part where you mentioned that information isn't always a solution. mentioned about it talked on the school, the parents. I'm sorry, when he was addressing parents about how they should be more involved in their education, that wasn't really helping. Personally, my project is a step of initiative to encourage women to take up spaces. Initially, before the pandemic, it was supposed to be more of us going into the communities, but now it is limited to just giving information. So I would like him to probably share more on how we could make more impact.
Great, thank you. And just to kind of reiterate the question in case I know that there was a little bit of feedback, is the question that Tosin asks is, you mentioned information is not always the solution, but sadly with the ongoing pandemic, most projects, including mine, has been limited to sharing information. What advice do you have in terms of how we can make more impact during this time specifically?
Thank you, Tosin. That's a great question. And I want to be clear that I am a big believer in information. I think information is often essential. It's just often it may not be enough by itself. So I think the thing we want to do is to say, it really helps to be clear what is the problem we are trying to solve, and to make sure we have a deep understanding of the problem, or rather that our response addresses the root causes of the problem, right? So in the example I gave, we thought the problem was the parents didn't know that their children were not learning, that they were going to school, but they didn't know they were not learning. And if we gave them the information that would help parents realize, oh, I'm sending my daughter to school, but she's not able to read and count, the parent will take the action. What we had failed to do there is to do a deeper analysis that would have shown that actually the root of the problem was the parents don't feel they have any say in how a school is run. They don't feel they have any entry point in how to influence the school. They don't feel empowered or confident to even speak to the school leaders. That was the root of the problem. So had we understood that, we might have both given different kinds of information, but we might have realized that we need to do other things other than just give information. So take this COVID situation, right? You could, and I'm not quite sure, Tosin, what exactly you're working with, but what you could do is to, once you have a deep analysis of the problem, even in COVID times, maybe through WhatsApp or, I don't know what other, or social distance meetings, it depends on your context, you could try to address those issues. And again, one way of doing that would be, before we quickly give the solution to people, is to ask them, what is the problem? Right? Because if we listen, maybe the parents would have told us, or the people, Tosin, you're working with will tell you, we are grappling with this, or we can't do what you're asking us to do because of that. So the more we address the root causes, the better. And the way to understand the root causes is to do more listening than talking.
Great, thank you so much. I see our next question from Rakia. If you wanna unmute yourself and introduce your name, university, where you're currently based.
Hello, my name is Rakesh Rajani West. I am one of the campus directors at Florida International University in Miami, Florida in the United States, and I'm advancing SDGs 2 and 11. And my question is, how do you make the distinction between a situation that calls for, skepticism and seeking alternative and unconventional options, as opposed to following the status quo to avoid wasting time, money, or resources?
Great question, Rakia. So I think you do both at the same time, right? It's if all you do is just a skeptic, and it can paralyze you. Like, you have so many questions, you do nothing. On the other hand, if you just blindly say, I'm just going to follow, and I'm not going to even ask whether this is working, that's a problem. So I think you bring both at the same time. If you look at some of the Marxist scholars, or even what was called the Frankfurt School, they bring this kind of dialectic between action and reflection at the same time. So if somebody says to you, look, we have a proven model here, this works, let's just go and do it, you say, great, let me understand the model. And how do you know it works? Oh, it's because of this. Okay, great, I'm going to do it. And then as you do it, you look for signs. Is it working? Because even the best solutions need to be continually checked and validated. What might have been really powerful 10 years ago may not be valid again today. Or what may be a great solution for some people may not be a great solution for others. We know, for example, that great solutions for men are not necessarily great solutions for women. Or great solutions that work for people who are professionals in well-paying jobs in their 40s may not be the solutions for gig workers in their 20s. So I think you basically want to bring the action, reflection, attitude, posture in everything that you do at the same time. Does that help? Does that help answer your question, Rakesh?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Rakesh, for participating. And the next question we have is from Denise Van Herden. Denise, if you want to introduce yourself first and ask your question.
Hi everyone, my name is Denise Van Heerden from the University of the Western Cape in South Africa. My question is, I have read an article about how to build a learning organization, and it said that we should allow people to make mistakes as the best lessons come from there. However, what is the next step? Where do we go from there? Does self-reflection and retrospection help? Thank you.
Great question again. I think it's easier said than done to say, let's allow people to make mistakes. But I think we should, and this is where what is really important is the more we do bring this culture of openness to mistakes early, it helps avoid, it allows you to do small mistakes and learn from small mistakes before the consequences are much bigger than later. If you have a closed-minded system where only the boss's view prevails, or we are so, we so much believe in our answer that we are not even interested in knowing whether it's not working, what ends up happening is that you end up doing something wrong for so long that by the time you then change, it may be too late, or you may have caused a lot of damage. So I think what that means is, if you think of development as a multiple steps, at each key step of the process, you build in a feedback loop, right? You create and say, okay, I am doing this today with the hope of achieving that, and I will want to make sure that early on, I want to build in that feedback that allows us to get that feedback. So first step, ask yourself, what will tell me whether the thing I'm doing is working, or rather, what will tell me that the thing I'm doing is not working? Identify right from the beginning, how are you going to find that out? What is the mechanism? Is it that you're going to listen to people? Is it you're going to do a survey? Is it that you're going to go out and monitor something? Look, like, before you start, ask yourself what it is you're going to monitor that will help that answer. Collect that information in a systematic way, not just anecdotal way. And then build into how you work time to look at that information, right? So when you do your planning, say, all right, we're going to do this. And then in 2 weeks from now, when we have our weekly staff meeting, I will bring that information around how that feedback, and let's discuss it together. And then when you discuss it together, you also then say, okay, now what are we going to continue doing because it's working, and what it is that we're going to change. And then finally, commit to make this public. It's really important. If you say, I'm going to make this public, it builds in accountability. That means you can't keep ignoring if somebody is telling you this is not working. And when you say make it public, that means going back and giving feedback to the people who did that. So for example, if you are doing a program to help women access water, it's important you listen to those women as to whether they're accessing water, and do all this, the whole cycle that I just discussed with you. But close the feedback loop by saying to the women, you know what? We're going to listen to you. We're going to take what you tell us very seriously. We're going to use that information to improve how we do things. And then we're going to come back to you and tell you two things. One, what did we learn from you by listening to you? And two, we're going to tell you how we're going to change our practice. What are the things of our practice we're going to reinforce? And what are the things in our practice that we're going to change? When you make that commitment to people, it closes the accountability loop in a way that's really powerful. And so building this approach in explicitly and consciously and making it a formal commitment is, I think, the best guarantee you have, or the closest thing you have to a guarantee of getting this right.
Thank you, Mr. Rajani.
Great, thank you for participating, Denise, and thank you for the answer. I see a question from Hassan. If you want to unmute yourself and introduce yourself before the question.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, thank you so much. Thanks so much, dear Nama. Hello, my name is Hassan. I'm from Greece, from American College of the American College of Greece. I'm studying sociology. I'm very interested in what you said. It's directly related to my major also. I would like to learn, when you approach to people, to different parts of the world, you have so many diverse background. When I read your background, your workplace, different among different communities. When you designate the problem, how was your first initiative? What kind of starting point with the government, local communities, how they reacted to you? They welcomed you, oh, we have a problem, please come and solve our problem. How is the interaction, first interaction, this is that feedback? It's important for me to be able to understand community reaction and to correct program, to correct way to give them. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hassan. That's another great question. So many ways of telling this story, right? Let me say it this way, that in my life, I have had lots of challenges, lots of pushback, lots of times where it's communities or governments or even colleagues or other organizations who have at times said no or questioned what I'm doing or gotten angry at me. And I think that is normal. It's if you're doing anything meaningful, you're going to have a lot of pushback, either because what you're doing is wrong or because people have different views. So how do I navigate this space? Let me tell you the story of when I first finished university and the first kind of work that I started. Started working with street children in my hometown, which is Mwanza, Tanzania, south of Lake Victoria in East Africa. And the first thing we started doing, working with street children, is we didn't set up any solution. We didn't set up any project. The first thing we did was do a 7-month study of why the children were on the streets, what got them there, and what is their life like. Yes. And the way we did that study is we became friends with children. We started off with 4 children who became, we didn't call them that, but became like research assistants. And we got them excited about this work, and then they opened things up. And what we learned so many things. For example, this was in the early 90s, we thought a lot of the children were on the street because they were orphaned by AIDS. AIDS was a major crisis at that time in that region. That was not the reason they were on the streets. AIDS actually had relatively little to do with it. It had to do with violence in the homes. So we learned different things with the children, and then some of the solutions started to come up. One of the biggest problems we realized is that the police in that city were a big part of the problem because they were also violent towards these children. So we then went to, our program started being created out of the experience of relationships with these communities. And then when we went to the police first said to us, "You're crazy. These people are thieves. They're terrible. They're dirty. What are you doing with them? You're crazy. We should lock them away, get rid of them." But because we had done this research, we were able to say, actually, that's not true, that they are dirty. And this street kid, here's her story. Here's his story. And this is what they're struggling with. And look, even though this person is a street kid, she's second in her class because she studies, even though she doesn't have a home to study. You know? And what it started doing was it gave us credibility with what we were speaking about. And that is the credibility that we were able to use to be able to convince very powerful leaders to see things in a different way. So I don't know, Hassan, if I'm asking your question, answering your question.
Perfect. Perfect.
Right?
Thank
But
you so much. Thank you so much.
It's
Yes.
the relationships that you do that then leads to the project design.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rakesh. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I think we have a space for one last question, hopefully. So I see a question from Mckenna. Mckenna, I'll unmute you if you can introduce yourself and ask your question.
Of course. Noha, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. So my name is Mckenna Flynn, and I'm campus director and fellow for Arizona State University. And for my fellowship program, I've really looked at, creating an opportunity to kind of raise the voices and create a self-advocacy platform. And one of the issues we've really ran into is that the marginalized communities in Arizona have just had so much exclusion when it comes to talking about things, especially in recent years. Issues have become so polarizing. So how can we, build trust with these communities outside of inviting them to leadership roles, which we've already been working on, and we've really got a lot of pushback on what strategies have worked well to build relationships within these communities and start building the trust to have these deeper conversations with them?
That's a great question. And I don't know what's happening at Arizona State University, but there's some magic there. Some of the best professors and the best research is happening there. So you're lucky to be there. I think the question you raise is profoundly important for all of us, right? A lot of the reason we have injustice in the world is because of exclusion. There are people and communities whose voices don't count. We see them differently. Look at the whole racial justice issue in the United States right now and around the world, the deep racism. Look at the deep misogyny and patriarchy. Look at the ways in which we think of indigenous people. A huge, if we do not address the issue of who is included, whose voice counts, how we see people, if we don't question our own biases and prejudices, we are not going to be succeeding in what we want to do. So one of the first things all of us should be doing is to see how are we thinking of the other? How do we frame the other? And what are the unconscious biases that we bring? This is especially more important for people who, like me, who are men, or people who come from higher incomes, or people who are part of a dominant race. Anytime we are part of a dominant group, we really need to think. So I really welcome your question. So what should be done? I would say two things. One, if you are from outside the group that is disadvantaged, the most important thing to do is just listen. Now, you might be getting tired of me saying this, but we, including myself, we just don't listen enough, right? We just should, we're so eager to start saying what we think, we should just listen more. So especially if we come from any group of privilege, and take time to listen and listen deeply and just make the space to absorb what we are hearing rather than quickly connect it to what we know. If you are part of that disadvantaged community or in allyship with them, the most important thing I would say, and if there's one thing I really would want you to remember today, it's this idea of collective action, of organizing. We sometimes, when we talk about leadership and we talk about social entrepreneurs, we celebrate individuals as heroes. And individuals can do things that are important. But I think one of the strategic mistakes we have made, including in the movements that we may be part of, is we put too much emphasis on individual heroes and individual leaders. If you look throughout history, it's not individuals who have changed the world. It's individuals who have been part of a larger organizing force. It's people who have invested time and energy in creating groups that bring people together, where not only the leaders get heard, but even the most ordinary people get heard and they feel they belong. So spend time in organizing. Spend time in creating, whether formal or informal groups or organizations, where people can feel, I can belong here. This is my place. This is my community. I can go there, whether it's a physical place or a virtual space or an online space. It is creating space where people feel they belong, they can be listened to, they can be understood, and then together we can plan the action we want to make. And I think if you look at the issues of Arizona and polarization or anywhere in the world, that organizing and that listening are the critical ingredients to success.
Great, thank you. I think, active listening and just listening to the community, listening to your team, and just practicing this skill over and over is really, really important. And often something that we do here, but as many things is hard to implement. So I appreciate this advice. I want to try and squeeze in one more question because I'm seeing a lot of questions. So I want to try and give as many students or fellows the opportunity to ask. So I see one from Saif. If you're here, I'm gonna try and unmute you now. If you can introduce yourself, name, university where you're from, and ask your question if you're here. Saif Kabarati. Saif, can you hear us? All right, well, let me try and see if there is, or let me read the question that Saif had, and then, because I think that could be a really great one. So Saif asks, if you're testing a hypothesis and by sharing your goals, you might jeopardize the quality of your results, would transparency still be crucial for the organization? So in maybe other words, where do you draw the line when it comes to sharing information with the public and bringing in that transparency model into your organization?
Great, that's a really important question. Look, my experience has been that maybe in the short term it might hurt you, but in the medium to long term, being transparent, including about your failures and mistakes, helps you, because the world has so little trust and so little integrity. When you act with integrity, you build your credibility. When I was at Twaweza, the organization I was working, the last organization I led, we openly talked about our mistakes. We published them. I made presentations. If you go on Google, you'll see me talk about the mistakes I've made. And what that does is it's refreshing. People know that happens. And when you speak about it openly, people trust you more. It actually increases your credibility. From a donor point of view, I had no problems fundraising because the donors trusted me. And one of the reasons they trusted me is I talked about our successes, but I also talked about our failures. And they then realized that this person is not just giving us bullshit. This person is not just doing a sales job. And that increased our credibility as an organization and most importantly, it increased our credibility among the communities that we worked with. So I would say, take the risk, be open and be honest. Yes, some people might be turned off, but the important people that you care about will be turned on, and they will trust you more, and we need more trust and integrity in the work that we do.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And this has been a fantastic session. And I think an attestment is all of the questions. And I think there are some that are unanswered, but I really, really appreciate your time, Rakesh. And fellows, if you have any feedback or thoughts on how the session is, I would love to see it in the chat box. Is there is there any way that fellows can stay in touch with you? If there is a preferred method, if you want to share that in the chat box, that would be amazing, Rakesh. Thank you so much for being on with us today. If there's any kind of last remarks or closing thoughts that you have for all of the fellows, that would want to give you the space for that.
Thank you. First, I just want to thank all of you for this opportunity to engage with you. I love doing this thing, and I just love, it gives me so much energy to see all of you whose faces I see and hear your questions. I think what you all are doing and engaging with is important. I'd love, I wish I could hear your stories. I'll be honest, My ability to engage one-on-one, I don't want to promise because I know I won't be able to deliver. My bandwidth is full, and right now I'm trying to simplify. So I won't be able to engage with you one-on-one. But to the extent through MCN, if I can hear your stories of how you are learning, I would love to do that. And if you have any advice about what I shared or how I could have done a better job, I would love to get that advice so I can learn of how I engage better in the future. So maybe through MCN, if you can do that, I'd love to hear your feedback. And thank you again so much.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and so I'll share our email in the chat box. If fellows have any questions, feedback, please share them with our team and we can get that across to you, Rakesh. So thank you all for your time here today. Thank you, Rakesh, once again. It was amazing having you here in the session, and I loved hearing from you and see all the questions from the fellows as well. So with that, I want to also thank the fellows for attending. Thank you all for joining at so many different time zones, and hopefully we can see you in our upcoming session on October 14th. So you'll see all the details in our portal. Thank you all for being on once again, and have a great rest of your day.